Okay.
Sounds really good.
All right. While we're getting that set up,
Okay.
this is, go ahead.
We're there, so that, let me go ahead and do the introduction. So I'm Skip Conover, and together with Tim Holmes, we've been doing Wisdom Path interviews for several years. And today we have a very special interview with our friend Coeleen Kiebert. And Tim is a fantastically well-known international artist in his own right. He's the first American to have shown a one-man show at the Hermitage, which is the world's largest art museum. And so Tim will be moderating today's talk. And so Tim, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for showing up here. We got 75 at the moment, and I'm sure there will be others straggling in. But I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time. I've known Coeleen about, what, 4 years, I guess?
Yeah.
And we've worked very closely on the Confluence project, which has been happening for 2 years now. I've had the privilege of working with Coeleen on these making Zoom sessions during COVID, and got to visit her studio probably, what, 4 or 5 times now.
I think
It's
so.
just
You've even done a workshop here.
Yeah, that's right. And it's her studio, much like mine, is just a palace of creativity. It's such a pleasure for those of you who've been there just to go there to see the amount of her art that's on display. It's just incredible. And it's a beautiful location too. But anyway, isn't this your second or third book, Coeleen?
Yes, it is. I've done 3 or 4 of these actually on the subject of the creative process, but this is a real culmination of things.
That's great. So this is the book we're talking about today, Art and Spirit. And it's just become available as of what, 2 weeks ago?
It's only
or a
been
week
about
ago?
2 weeks now.
Yeah.
Your copy.
And I'm sure we can put in the chat how people can get a hold of it. But basically, we wanted to talk a little bit about what the book covers, and there will be time at the end for questions. So let's try to give Coeleen some time to take us through some of the material, and then we'll have questions at the end. My intention is we'll go for not more than 90 minutes. And in respect of Coeleen, if she gets tired, we can cut off early. But this is going to be a fascinating conversation. Coeleen was born in Minnesota and moved to California as a maybe 20 or 30-year-old with her young family. And 50 years ago was able to move into this beautiful clifftop house outside of Santa Cruz, California, that has just a spectacular view and is one of those places that I think of as being a real fount of creativity just from the location alone. Anyway, Coeleen was hired as a professor at the University of California in Santa Cruz and taught there for, I don't know how many years, Coeleen?
Well over 30, I think. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And since 1970 has been doing these workshops on the creative process in her studio, and continues to do them as of yesterday.
Yes. And
So,
yeah.
I hope your voice is in good shape to be talking to us today. But in any case, I feel so honored to know Coeleen. She is a true artist. She carries on a creative life day after day and has had a profound impact on a lot of people, many of whom are online with us today. So I'm eager to get into the material of the book. It's not only about the creative process, so it's she calls it a memoir, and it's really covering a lot of her professional life, what she's gone through, some of which is really tragic, and the effect that that life has had on her art and her process. And I think what we are mostly interested in today is the idea of the creative process. She talks about some other things in the book, and maybe we'll have time to get into that. But let's first of all start with her telling us kind of the basic idea of art and spirit and what her intention was in publishing the book. So go ahead, Coeleen.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. That's a beautiful introduction. And reminds me of the nice memories that we've had together, you and Skip and some of the others here today and at the Confluence. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate you. The book has been in the making for quite a bit longer than I realized. But over the time of being together in the Art and Spirit workshops, my students have said, you've got to write about this. There's something going on here, and you've got to write about it, and you've got to write about your life. And I encourage women to write about their lives because we need this so much.
Coeleen, I hate to interrupt you, but I need to ask everyone in the audience to mute themselves so that we don't have outside sound on the video. And then, or I may mute everyone if I can have time to do it, but sorry to interrupt, but we need
Okay.
to, okay. So
Yeah.
everyone please mute yourself except for Tim and Coeleen.
Thank you. That's helpful because I wasn't really sure whether that was me or not, and that I should be doing something. So thank you, Skip, for that. So to pick up, the story of our lives, the resources are far too shallow, and it is important that women begin to tell the story of their lives, to encourage each other to tell what has happened and what it is that we as women have been going through these many decades and much longer, thousands of years, if we look at it completely. So the idea of a memoir, though, of my own life was not quite enough for a book, maybe a journal, but not a book. But I began to realize that the Art and Spirit workshop is the real jewel here. This is the real protagonist in my story. And it began when I was living in Minneapolis with 4 children and had a good enough career as an artist of some success, and was knowing that it was a lot of fun to do. There was a lot of inspiration and excitement around it until there wasn't. And I suppose you would call it a midlife as opposed, it's the same thing. Came upon me in my late 20s, probably no older than 30, when suddenly it wasn't there anymore. I'm going to read from the preface in my book. With this memoir, I tell of my journey with life and the discovery of the stages of the creative process. I began as an early artist when I first took the spirit of my creativity for granted. It was exciting and fun, and I even enjoyed a moderate success in the market. Then, nearing midlife, I lost that spirit. It vanished from my life, along with all sense of meaning. I described my challenging struggle to gain it back, and the cost, the promise, and the gratitude of finally recovering my creative gifts, owning them with a depth and honesty that I never imagined possible. So the book is divided into four. Here we have the picture of the cover of the book, Art and Spirit. And I'll explain the apples as we go on. The book is divided into four books, actually. And the first book is the description of this process that I went through. The second book is a collection of how the process has been affected by different events that have happened, the women's movement in particular, but the events that have followed that, like the election and the pandemic and other challenges in my life.
Coeleen, I'm sorry, but we had I'm sorry, we had a brief internet hiccup. So you were just starting to talk about the process. I wonder if you'd go back to that and do it again.
The first book is the discovery of the process. The second book is how I've applied those stages of the process. And the third book is how I've responded to events in our nation, our culture, our lives, like the women's movement, the election, Hillary losing the election, which for those of us as women feminists were quite disappointed. And the third book is a collection of papers, and the fourth book is a response to the pandemic. And it's a collection of Zoom meetings that we had when the pandemic started, but we still had a need for our community. So back to the beginning. In the late 60s, Abraham Maslow came out with his paper on the creative attitude. And I was very fortunate that my cousin Bill Kiebert, who is also a professional artist and made a living as an artist, passed that paper on to me. And there was the information about the creative attitude, which is the name of the paper. And in that paper, Maslow talks about the aha moment, which he called the peak experience. And I knew what he meant by the peak experience. And I think that many of you that are here today know what that's about. It's an explosion. It's a numinosum. It's a sudden reality. Everything has changed, and suddenly you know that what's going on is just right. You could be jogging in the park. You could be painting a painting. You could be just watching the sunset. You could be writing a book. But there are these moments that are called peak experiences. And then Maslow talked about the few peak experiences that people have in their lives and began to go on about the self-actualized human being. And that piqued my interest. And I know that after having come here, I learned from my own teacher, Frank Barron, who knew and worked with Maslow around this subject, that in the 60s, there was a big meeting in San Francisco at the Unitarian Church. And Maslow was there, along with Gregory Bateson, Frank Barron, Alan Watts, Stan Groff, names, people that you know still today. The meeting was so big that they had to bring it to an end and announce that it would happen again the next Sunday, and it did. Only by that time they had set up speakers in other churches in the city because there were so many people that wanted to be there. The important thing about my telling you this is that Abraham Maslow said something is happening. There is a new human being born, and there's a movement happening to assist that human being, and I am going to call it the Human Potential Movement. Now, all of us are a result of that human potential movement. Many of us have been in workshops, we've read books, we've tried the drugs that take us into the peak experience. We've tried many other methods, in particular meditation, but we've all engaged in this. But I would like for us to understand that we are part of a movement. It's an evolution in our consciousness, and it's one that C.G. Jung predicted would happen, and it's one that Maslow, as I have said, predicted would happen. So to go back to my own personal experience, at that time, I knew what a peak experience was, but I was not experiencing the self-actualized life. And I went to a workshop that the National Training Laboratories put on, a very sophisticated training group, mostly in the world of organization development and community organizing. That's a red herring. I won't go off in that, but they've done a lot of exciting things. They only did this workshop once, but I only needed it once. And in that workshop, there were 10 or so, 12 of us, maybe at the most, a priest, a nun, psychologists who were interested in this subject, community organizers, and myself. And I heard myself say at the beginning of the workshop, I want to understand what this creative experience is about. I want to know, what is this creative process? And we were each given a studio to rattle around in by ourselves, which was really hell on wheels, I've got to say. It's not the best way to go about it. Anyway, it was pretty tough for me. But out of that experience, I began to realize that it's not just a peak experience. It's a process. It's a process, and it's got stages to it, and it unfolds, and it begins with that first stage of I am going to do something. I am going to go to a workshop and find out what's happening, or I am going to sign up on Saturday morning for this talk right now that we're experiencing. And now we're in the second stage, which is gathering, pulling together what it is that we want to talk about, what it is that we're interested in. And then there is a third stage, which is an elaboration on gathering. And I learned about this from my son-in-law, who I think is here today, John Gruen, and my daughter, Kathleen. The three of us were talking about this one day, and they said, you know, there's something else going on there. And in the world of advertising, which they both were deeply involved in, there's intimation, there's dots, but connecting the dots. It's so tough to be in gathering because it can get very dark. And often in gathering, people give up. This is too tough. I shouldn't have started this in the first place. These aren't the people I want to be with, or I should be doing something else this morning other than sitting here in front of a Zoom class. So all of these voices come in that have got to do with your particular complex to deal with, but they are always meaningful in a personal way, I believe. But we begin to connect the dots, and that's intimation. It's like believing in intimation. And Jung addressed this part of the process. He said, when you get started with a creative experience that has got to do with coming from the unconscious, which is the second part of my book, you will doubt what's coming up. You'll doubt it. You'll say that can't possibly be, but you must not doubt it. You must have faith in yourself and faith in your own creative process that those dots coming together have got potential. And when you do that and you ride that out, that's where the aha comes and things come together, things fall into place. And that's what I call illumination. I think at first I called it explosion because it always felt like an explosion when it happened. But I think that illumination is a good word for it because suddenly we know a truth that we didn't know before. And it can be about the way a painting is working out, or the way a sculpture is coming together, or a poem that you've written is suddenly coming together, just falling out ahead of you. That's illumination. Now there's 2 more stages to the process. And in our culture, we're not, we're too impatient. We want products. We want to keep going. My inclination after that kind of an experience is, oh, I can hardly wait to get back to the clay. I can hardly wait for the next one. But we need to learn to reflect, to stop and be with what has happened and look at it and say, what is this? What has just happened? I think maybe for those of you who are good in the kitchen, this is a wonderful way. You decide that you're going to have dinner at your home and you announce it. You invite your friends. You set the table. You decide what it is that you're going to have. All of that is statement of intention. And then you get into gathering. Okay, I need this, I need that. Here are the vegetables. What's going to be for dessert? How do I fix it? You prepare the whole thing. And then, ta-da, it comes out onto the table. Now, what happens when people just dive in and start eating? Or what is the difference when we just sit and look at it? Maybe give thanks for it. Maybe thank the host, the hostess, for what it is that they've done. To take that time for reflection in order to develop our humanity, ourselves as human beings. Tim, you really spoke to this once when you said that in reflection, when you finish a sculpture, you like to turn off all the lights in the room and just have one light over the sculpture and sit with it. And that's a beautiful example to me of reflection. I might write about it. It's something that deserves to be acknowledged. And then what does it mean to me? And then the last stage is we want to share it. Now I'm talking about the experience when we have it personally, alone, as an individual, but of course this happens in groups too. We want to share it. We want to tell people. As a young kid, you come home, look, Mom, look what I did, and up it goes on the refrigerator. That's validation of the process. We want to have a show. We want to take part in an exhibit. We want people to acknowledge how good the food tastes, what a good experience it was to come here and sit at your table and eat your food, and to give that thanks for it. That's the validation of the creative experience. So that's the long and short of the stages of the creative process. There might be other stages that some of you will recognize to build into it, to refine it even further. I hope so. But for now, one of the things that almost always happens, I think this is a trick of the Holy Spirit, frankly, is that during validation, you'll hear the author of the experience say, pretty good, but next time I think maybe a little less cinnamon, or next time I'm going to serve that salmon that I've always wanted. You'll hear them talk about it. What are you going to do next? You ask the artist or you ask the author, what's next? But you'll hear them say, next time I think I'm going to. And that's the statement of intention coming right up again. I came home realizing from that workshop, realizing that it's not one big experience. It's a process, and we're in it all the time. I thought at first that it was just my process, and I had students at the time, and I told my students, you're going to have to find your process now, because everybody has one. And they just looked at me and said, but that's it. That is the process. And I realized this is a universal thing. This is in our DNA. This is what we do, Homo sapiens. Bees make a hive. Birds build a nest. We create. And this is how we do it. And we're in it all the time. You might be miserable in it. You could be stuck in one stage or the other. You could be omitting a stage, and so things aren't working out so well, but you're in it. And you can't get out of it because it's built into our DNA. So let's just get conscious about it, particularly that reflection part. When we look at what's going on in Gaza right now, we're trying to come up with old solutions. We don't know what the solution is. We just don't know. But there's only one way, and that's to sit down and reflect on it. Reflect on what is happening. If we sit down and reflect on what's going on, you can't keep doing this, But if you don't do that, then you just keep pounding more war. Just keep repeating it over and over and over for eons. We haven't broken out yet of just repeating the first 4 stages of the creative process. Oh, we're going to go to war. We're going to gather up our weapons. We're going to figure out which ones work best. We're going to decimate those people. And then we're going to do it again and again and again. So I see the creative process happening everywhere. And see,
Hey, Coeleen, let me interrupt you just for a minute to say thanks for bringing up the example of cooking a meal, because what I worry about when we start talking about the creative process is some people think, well, I'm not creative, I'm not an artist, I can't draw or something like that, and they tend to narrow their focus. But the fact is, what you're saying is absolutely true. Every one of us cooks a meal. Every one of us is deeply embedded in the process of life. And what you're talking about, the creative human spirit is what distinguishes the human being. We have this godlike power to create something out of nothing. And all of us are engaged in that. And I really want to be inclusive of people who don't feel like they're artistic, because everybody does this. Yeah.
It's something that has been so embedded in mystery, and unfortunately been delegated to the crazies of the world. And one of the wonderful things that Frank Barron brought to the creative process was that understanding that it is built into everyone. And actually, let me step back to Maslow again, whom he died an early death, and relatively so. And I think that he had a lot more to give us had he been around a little bit longer. That creative urge that you refer to is built into our DNA. And Maslow was the first psychologist to say, why are we only studying sick people? Isn't it time for us to start studying the people who are creative, the people who are making it in the world? And that was a turnaround in the field of psychology, a real turnaround. That's where he wanted to know about this new human potential movement if we study the people that are making it. And let me throw in here right now, Ravina Helson, with whom Frank and Stan Groff in particular worked with. She did a 50-year longitudinal study of creative women from Mills College, and her book just came out about 3 years ago, and Ravina died a long life. Fortunately, before her book came out, the river, what is it? The river is in the title, and it's Ravina Helson, University of Berkeley.
Women on the Rivers of Life.
Thank you. Women on the Rivers of Life, which includes this study that Maslow was doing about which of those girls at the age of high school were predicted to do things in the world. And what were those characteristics of them, and how were they raised in their families? And let me just quickly say, I can't tell you, gentlemen, how important it is that you support your daughters, that you support your daughters. That's the big thing. That is the big thing. Take your daughters seriously. And it's the same for the men. It's your mothers. The women have got to give that support to their sons, particularly if their sons are on a path that isn't the straight and narrow in our culture. So back to that creative urge. It's in our DNA. It's there. And maybe some people have talent for it, like some people have talent for understanding their computers, that we have varying ingredients or strengths in these fields. But the creative urge is a separate urge. And this is where Jung and Freud fell apart. Freud believed that everything in the unconscious was coming from the sexual urge, repressed or manifested, but that it was all coming from that. Jung followed Freud. That was where Jung became a psychoanalyst, but he also believed that in studying the people that he had in normal people that he had in therapy and people who were institutionalized, that their unconscious was very much the same. He began to believe that it's not all the sexual urge, but there are other urges. There is the urge to create, and it's separate. Sometimes they cross over, but it is separate. And that's something we need to begin to understand. We're a long ways from getting that. But Frank Barron did the studies of when he was at the University of Minnesota teaching with B.F. Skinner. They were very much the behaviorists, and they were using the MMPI to study schizophrenics. And Frank noted that the schizophrenics had a very high scale on their ability to engage with the unconscious. However, they tend to get lost in the unconscious and stay there, which is sometimes called the mystique of it. So when Frank came to UC Berkeley, he studied the artists who were graduate students at UC Berkeley and saw that they were just as schizophrenic as the schizophrenics that were institutionalized. And what was the difference? It was Frank's ego strength scale. He designed the ego strength scale on the Minnesota Multiphasic because he wanted a prognosis. It's very good at describing personality, but it didn't have a potential for therapy built into it. And so Frank built that scale. And that's my hidden agenda in doing art the way we do it, because we're going into our unconscious in my way of teaching. And when we go into our unconscious and we bring images up from our unconscious, we're building ego strength in the most positive way. And so that's putting the dots together. It just makes perfect sense to me. And I've seen many artists sigh a breath of relief when they hear about that study, that's the difference.
Say, is there is there a way we can have more information about that? Did Frank publish anything about that? Or is there something online or anything?
Frank has written a few books, and one is called The Making of the Artist. And you might find it in The Making of the Artist. His last book speaks to just what I've said. The title is No Rootless Flower. No rootless flower. That's each of us. He's
Wow.
referring
So
to.
I need
It's
to
like
interrupt.
a memoir, and Frank was a Irish Catholic, had an audience with the Pope, had this kind of unusual crossover of his religious life and his life of psychology. And that was what
Yeah.
attracted me to Frank, and was my reason for moving from Minnesota to University of California, Santa Cruz, so I could study with him.
So, Coeleen, I need to interrupt just for a moment because we should be putting the website out where your book can be found
Oh, thank you.
as we're talking. So, could you remind me what that is? And I'll
Mhm.
put it in both the YouTube chat and the Zoom chat.
Thank you. It's my name followed by the word .art. So it's Coeleen Kiebert .art.
Okay, thank you.
And you can order the book
And also-
directly from me, or you can order it from BookBaby or Amazon or B. Dalton or Walmart. Yeah. But I'd appreciate it if you ordered it from BookBaby or from me. But
And
it's
also somebody asked, what's Frank's surname?
Barron, Barron. He's kind of a quiet guy that sipped a lot of whiskey, and it's going to take a while for his name to be recognized, but it is. On one occasion that had to do with architecture, somebody came up to me. This has only happened once, but I understand you were studied with Frank Barron. I'd never had anybody approach me like that before. I said, yes, I did, and he's going to go down in history. I believe it too. You know, this thing, studying creative people, and this thing about the importance of ego strength, particularly for women. But just let me say one more thing about that. You know, when the meditation groups started and had the blessing of Buddhism and others, there was an overview of that this is a way to get rid of your ego, that you need to get rid of your ego. And because this is a death wish for women, to just take into consideration what this could possibly mean. This is the worst thing that you could ask. For men, it means your ego should be in the service of your self-development. You don't want to get rid of it. You need it in the service of your creative spirit, whatever you call that. Maybe it's in the service of the Holy Spirit. Maybe it's in the service of enlightenment. But the ego needs to be turned around and given over to the service of what it is that you're here to do.
Boy, that's beautiful.
So there. It's a hidden agenda, and that's where the doodle comes in. You know, the making of the doodle that the child does. It's just such a natural thing for a child to start to doodle, and then we're told that that's a bad thing to do, particularly when we're in school, and the teacher is lecturing and the child is doodling, or the teenager is doodling. But I think that the reason why that teenager is doodling is because the lecture is so boring that they have to do something to establish the self while this is going on, because this is toxic. You know, so that development, and then in the book, in the second book, I talk about the development of the doodle. And for instance, let me do something here. So
I think one of the things that's so important about that is tapping into the creative unconscious that all of us have, all of us feel these kind of unspoken urges that we can't really identify. And it's the kind of thing that Freud said, oh, that's just a sexual urge. And Jung comes along and says, well, there, as you say, there's more to it than that. And this is everything that Coeleen is talking about is the means of unfolding that secret wisdom that all of us carry. And this is why this technique is so powerful. And words like doodling, it just makes it sound so silly. But the fact is, what you're doing is releasing that energy and tapping into that secret place of wisdom.
Yes, yes. And you can develop, you should develop your doodle. And what I mean by that is that I tend to start with round lines like that. And and when I was referring to the mystique, participation mystique, it's called, I can do that all day. It's just very relaxing and it feels really wonderful. This is what I do. Very easy.
I'm going to put this on your shoulder.
Oh,
Keep
okay.
going.
Oh, all right. So I can do this. Thanks, Wally. But what happens if I begin to build in some perspective here? We get some things that are maybe even look through this thing. Like this. Oh, maybe this shape is actually coming over here. Like this. Oh, I can see it's showing up over here too. So I can begin to elaborate on it by giving it more form. But still, I'm playing around this round thing. Now, what if I come in with an arrow like this? With these sharp lines and maybe come through here like this. Ah, now I'm getting more perspective going on. This is developing my mind, my way of seeing things. Now, what am I going to do down here? Well, I'd like for it to continue on like this. Now, what if it sticks up through here? How does this feel about this coming to just stick up through here? But now it's coming through. I'm just working with one color here. So this can be developed more by combining some angles with this. Now it's getting more interesting here. And maybe there's something else going on behind here. Again, starting to come through. Now, one of the hardest things I find is making it transparent. And I think that when we're doing this process of turning line into form and turning form into action, beginning to look like it could be a pretty good sculpture, frankly, if I do say so. Making things transparent is the toughest part. I think that's the spiritual development part of it. That how can I make this look transparent right here? This shape. And what happens if I open this up here so that I can see through it? How does my form feel about suddenly becoming transparent and being seen through? So things begin to happen for us personally. And in my book, I tell of being at a showing. I'll do it again, Ron. So I'm at an exhibition. This is before the breakdown, and I'm doing a painting of lovely, sophisticated women like this. And these are selling like hotcakes. And I have very solid spaces like this in it. And this gentleman comes up to me and says, what if, he almost touches my painting, what if this line here were to cross over into this space over here? Or what if this line, this solid stuff, colored, were to cross over into this space? And in my book, I say, I could feel my toes grip the ground and my teeth clenched. And I said, that will never happen. And he said to me, I've known women like you. Now,
Wow.
that was, my paintings were tight and rigid and very sophisticated looking. And I was very judgmental and tight about what it was that I was doing and self-confident. And I thought, what is going on that I'm having this kind of a reaction to it? But then after a few years of therapy, after a few years of working on this, the colors begin to move. They begin to cross the line. They become transparent. They enhance each other by crossing over. They gain dimension as I develop this. And then I say to my therapist, how can this be going on? How can my art be reflecting the change in me without my even trying or realizing this? And he said, that is what you will have to find out. And then I moved to California to work with Frank.
Wow, that's great. I really appreciate being able to see you work in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful.
So, Coeleen, we have a question from Ilyana, who's going to interview you next month, I believe.
Yes, yes.
And she says, is being of service with your creative process part of the step of setting an intention, or is it a different part of the creative process? Okay, I'll read it. You're okay?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll read it again.
Okay.
Is quote, being of service, unquote, with your creative process part of the step of setting an intention, unquote, or is it a different part of the creative process?
No, I think that it's the same. That is the same, that when you realize how important it is, then I think a way to respond to that is, Tim, earlier in the introduction, you referred to the tragedy. And at the time that my son died, I was thrown into grief and tragedy, and I couldn't do any art at all. And part of that was because I knew what it would look like. And I had seen, in conjunction with his death, which called for my going to Rome, I had seen the Pietà. And I knew that if I did any art at all, it was going to have to be that Pietà. And so I tiptoed around that for several months before I finally gave into it. And it was the realization that if there is anything to what I believe about the potential of creativity being a healing force, if there's anything to this, then I need to use it now, or forget about art. You know, it's either going to take me through what it is that I'm experiencing, or I'll go back to doing art the way I used to. And it could be a saving grace that way too. But I chose at that time to say, okay, that means that my art is not any longer going to be for the public. It's going to be for me, just to get me through and understand what's going on here. And I think, Ileana, that's an answer to your question, that decision at that time. And so the same thing happened again with the election and my fears about where the country might be going. Certainly with the women's movement and seeing the need that, well, the election was okay if it can be an opportunity for the feminine to come forth. And then the experience of the feminine coming forth at the time of the election became my vocabulary, which is another subject. I believe that we need to know what our vocabulary is. What do we want to talk about when we're doing our art? Using the events that are happening and what they're doing to me. And so seeing that the feminine was coming forth with Roe versus Wade, but lost it, lost it. And so that took me into a whole series of corset pieces and how the feminine has experienced the tightening of the corset, the purpose of the corset in the first place, and then the tightening of it. And lo and behold, as I'm doing that, it becomes the latest thing in fashion, is the corset. And the proof of the collective unconscious is just continuously proving itself to me when I see what's going on in the studio. It is often just a couple months before we see it in the New York Times. It's in the collective unconscious, and to tap into that for our work as artists, I think is what is needed. And I think you referred to it, Skip, about the importance of our being conscious about the collective unconscious, that we all have. We're born with the collective unconscious. Jung says this comes with the package.
Yes.
It comes with the package. We're born with the collective unconscious. And then as we get up and we walk and we identify mommy and daddy, an ego begins to develop and a personal unconscious begins to develop. And then our dreams come from that personal unconscious and that collective unconscious. But the collective unconscious,
that's what we've been trying to do with your work, is try to make the unconscious more conscious in our Confluence series. And it took us to the second one to really focus on what it is we were doing. But in our last Confluence last October, we definitely were consciously thinking about making the unconscious conscious. And it was a very, very powerful experience.
Yes, it was. It was. And it's something that we need to do to access that intelligence that's in our unconscious. It is so wise. Look at the resources that it has. It has all of time. Everything that's ever happened is there. And it's so intelligent. I'm sure that you all have those moments where two things come together and you're just amazed, how could that have happened? That's the intelligence of the collective unconscious, and it's running the show, and it's very creative. And I think of the January 6th as an incredibly creative experience. Look at how the creativity came forth. The Capitol was the stage set of all. My God, you couldn't ask for a greater stage. The costuming, the chanting, the guillotine, hang Pence, hang Pelosi, the chanting.
That's right.
Take them down, take them down. And then we even have a murder. And it's of the feminine. It's of the feminine that got lost in that whole thing that was going on. We had people climbing the walls, incredibly creative. That's an example of how the creative will come up out of the collective unconscious. We've got to feed it. We've got to get intelligent about it and use it. That was an incredible example to me. And it was very masculine. You know, it was mostly males that were letting off steam. I'm not surprised, letting off steam because of what's going on, what's happening to our masculinity. They get dressed up, they paint their faces, they're wearing horns, they've got weapons. Back to a very primal level of the masculine that's being threatened at this time.
Yeah, and the one person who in the demonstrators who was shot and killed was a woman.
It's what happened to the feminine.
Yeah.
It's what happened.
And one thing that we've been kind of referring to, but I want to point out is that human beings are naturally kind of disposed to be like cats. You know, we'd like to just lay around and nap all day. And so oftentimes it takes some kind of painful experience in order to make us come alive to what's happening in front of us. And, you know, January 6th is a really good example of that. But all of us have tragedies in our lives or difficulties, barriers that we come up against. And it's not until we hit something like that we are irritated enough to really take the creative drive seriously.
Mm-hmm. It can bring us to our knees. You know, something happens to us. I would put it that way. That something happens to us because our, again, Jung says out of the repression of our unconscious, we develop complexes. And so that happens in the family. Every family has its, you can talk about this, but you can't talk about that. And
Right.
So we're just human beings. That's what we do. So those things that we can't talk about become complexes. And those complexes become like magnets. And the collective unconscious is looking for certain magnets. And it clearly finds them. That day was quite an example of that, but clearly it finds them. And then there is this explosion that comes about. But we're brought down to our knees and have to make a choice. Then, am I going to try to figure out what's going on? Or am I just going to try to survive this? And sometimes that's really all we can do. We're just brought down to the survival level. And then it's, what is this about me?
And oftentimes in my own experience, you know, in the middle of the tragedy, you kind of referred to this. You can't do anything. You're just so full of pain or anger or whatever it is that if you try to, well, I have to speak to myself, I guess. If I try to create in that state, it just ends up being like a primal scream, and I have to process that emotion. But it's not until after a lot of that energy dissipates and I'm able to bring in the reflective element that I can talk in a sensible way, not necessarily sensible, but in a powerful enough way that other people can share in the experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. That's how Jung talks about digging deep. The artist longs to dig deep within themselves and bring it up. But the first thing that you refer to about the tragedy, if you just do it right away, you concretize the tragedy. And Peter Levine has done, a psychotherapist, has done some brilliant work around this subject, as did my husband, Ed Jackson. And Peter and Ed were good friends, and I would hear them at dinner talking about this process of concretizing the trauma. And instead of concretizing that right away, talking about that right away, what you want to get to is what got you here.
So,
What
Coeleen,
got you to pick up the phone and make a call. That's the part we want to know about, because that's the part of you, the champion, that wants you to make it through this. What does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that say to you? Then you deal with the trauma when you have this conversation going on between these two parts of yourself, the one that experienced the trauma, the one that got you here.
right.
Yes.
So, Coeleen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that Tim's stricture about 90 minutes is probably pipe dream. And so I wonder if we should this is really important stuff you're talking about and really getting into. And so why don't we take a short break? I'll leave the system going so anybody can chat. And why don't you take a short 5-minute break if you like, and
Drink of water. Yeah.
right. And I mean, do you mind if we go a little over the hour and a half? Because the problem is we have 95 people watching live right now. Okay. And I don't want to lose
Left.
Yeah.
lose.
Longer, you see. Yeah, this sounds good. Let's take
Okay.
3 or 4 minutes.
All right, fine. Great.
Okay.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Okay. I'll be right back.
You're listening so far. What? No. Jordan, are you there?
I am.
I wonder if you might be an imposter. The Jordan I know had this big, beautiful mane of long hair. What happened?
Molting.
Oh my gosh. Like a snake, you lost your skin.
I did. And it's funny. Someone said that yesterday at my table. And I said, the snake, its skin shedded. The snake, its skin not missed. Yeah. It's funny. It was actually a 4-piece process that occurred over about 2 months, 3 months, actually 5. I'm walking out my door and I look over at my hat and I just go, And I just kept walking. Well, I didn't realize that for 3 years at my table, the only thing that people said all day was, "Where's your hat? Where's your hat? Where's your hat?" And 2 weeks later, that waist length beard, Santa Claus, Santa Claus left our presence. And then I simply tried to stop using metaphor, but I realized that it wasn't metaphor. It was, don't use 5 in a row. Just use 1. And then I lost 56 pounds. So
Oh my
maybe the
gosh.
hair was about 10 of that. Yeah, I went short. So
Man. Yeah, me too.
yeah, it feels better, honestly. Plus, I think up here, it had decided to play hooky. So with it long in the back, it started feeling a little weird. So thanks for noticing.
Say if anybody has questions, we've run into people before who couldn't access their mic for one reason or another. So if you have a question that you can't express auditorially, put it in the chat, and I'm monitoring the chat here for questions, and Skip is doing the same on YouTube. So we should be able to cover that. And before Coeleen comes back, I did tell her that we were going to try to keep it to 90 minutes, and she said, "Thank you, I'll get tired by then." So let's be sensitive to her energy level. Maybe
Right.
Wally can help us with that.
Fair
Thanks,
enough, although she seems to have plenty of energy right now.
Yeah,
and
she
we
sure does.
need to get through some more of this book if we can. And I just wanted to mention, I'm going to put the link for the MailChimp on the YouTube chat, or I'm sorry, on the Zoom chat. So if any of our audience would like to be notified of any of our events, the main events we have are Wisdom Path events like this, which usually involve an author, but we also have regular weekly discussions right now of the Red Book, both on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. and we have an advanced reading group on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. All of it is free, so feel free to join us if you're interested. And I'm going to put the link for that on the chat in Zoom right now.
And he's talking Eastern time.
Yeah. Yeah, those are Eastern times, 10 a.m. Eastern time on Sunday. I know it's early for California, but Coeleen is back, so
Good. And Nancy's got a question here. Is Coeleen's process discussed in her new book, and is she still teaching and offering workshops? And the
Yes.
answer is yes. 2
Yes.
yeses.
Yes, I'm doing a 12-week certificate program right now. We're in the 7th week of that, teaching this process. And with that, I'd like to say, I think one of the most important things to talk about today also is the 3 tenets, I call them, of the Art and Spirit workshop then. And the first is this understanding that there is a process and that you're in it all the time, and where are you in it now and how's it going. The second one is to access your vocabulary. What do you want to talk about? What's that going to be about? And I remember at the time that I was deciding to move from Minneapolis to California, my Gestalt art therapist, Janie Ryan, said, "What are you so afraid of?" And I said, "I'm afraid that I'm just going to be a bag lady pushing a cart around begging." And she said, "You know what I'm afraid is? I'm afraid that you're going to end up painting lovely pictures, still lifes." That's vocabulary. So when David died, my vocabulary changed radically to try to figure out what was going on with that. And then the third thing is style. What is your style? And your style comes up out of your doodle. You can't help it. It's there. We bring the model in, everybody draws the same thing, but you know whose is whose. Why is that? Because it comes up. Now, a graduate student in art, somebody who decides that they're going to make a profession as an artist, might get caught up in the style of the day. Start making, scribbling around, thinking that they might be a Cy Twombly, throwing paint around, thinking that they might be a de Kooning or a Picasso. So you need to be careful to not get caught up in the style of the day and be true to your own mark and develop that mark. And that's what those artists had the courage to bet on. Nobody else was doing what they were doing. They bet on their own mark and they developed it. And we have much to be grateful for. Understand it or not. John Cage, I do not understand, but I respect.
A quote.
Say,
comes to
about an hour ago, you mentioned the apple and you
No.
indicated you would talk a little bit about that. Can you
Yes.
tell us
Yeah.
what that means to you?
Yeah.
I have a quote really
Just a
quickly.
moment. Wallace wants to, yeah.
Yeah, the quote, walk not in the footsteps of the masters, seek what they sought.
Yeah, seek what they sought. Yeah. We look at an abstract painting, let's say Jackson Pollock. The Western mind wants to be entertained. We look at it and we say, I like it or I don't like it, and walk away. But a Chinese will look at it and say, where did he start? Then what did he do? Then what did he do? What was the experience the artist was having when they brought that color around that way? Helen Frankenthaler, oh my God, the painting that she did when she was asked to do a painting for the John F. Kennedy Library. How long was it? Maybe 18 feet by 8 feet. One long black line and a red splash at the end. The family could hardly stand it. Didn't know whether they could accept it or not. They did finally accept it. What was the experience she was having when she did that? You know exactly how she felt about what happened. That, to me, is an example of being true to her own mark and digging deep for her vocabulary, what she was going to talk about. So at the time that David died, these are shown in the book, and they are now on display in the Justice Courtyard at U.C.S.C. I'm very proud of that. This was my search for trying to understand, what is it that I must know? What is our family supposed to figure out from this experience? And I began to take the dive, and I learned about the Bardo, and I figured I was going to need a lot of equipment to go into the Bardo. And these were my guides in the Bardo with their equipment. Maybe I could meet him in the Bardo. Maybe I could understand. And these are the ships that I rode on when I went down into the Bardo to find out. Now, progressing the image in these first justice pieces that I did not know why I was putting the snake in there, but I felt that there was evil involved. And I have my toe on the snake. And I thought that perhaps if we recognize evil and we keep our toe on it, it can't attack us. It's when we don't keep our toe, when we try to pretend that it's not there, or, oh, it's transformation, da, 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 da. There are many places that you can take it, thankfully. But I was doing this, and somebody came to me and said that I was having an exhibit at the museum of these pieces, and somebody said there's another exhibit going on right now of photographs of the Carrara marble quarries in Italy, and they're doing the photographs are of them doing the Madonna in marble, and she has her foot on a snake. Since then, I have learned that all of the Madonnas have their foot on the snake. All of them. You'll find it in paintings. I have Mary Holmes' painting of Lilith and Eve. Here is Lilith giving the apple to Eve. Now, at the very bottom, when I asked if I could use this painting, her son, Mary is no longer with us, and her son, Michael, agreed. And then when I saw it so closely, I said, oh, there's a snake. She has her foot on a snake. And Michael said, oh, no, that can't be, that can't be. And then a couple days later, you're right. She has her foot on a snake.
Wow.
And then I got on to using the snake transformed into the red ribbon of my life. And I'm telling the story of my life from Minneapolis to here to today. And a friend who might be here today came into the studio and asked me, what's going on with your work? And I said, oh, there are these red ribbons in my work, which I tell about in the book. And they have these knots in them. And she says, oh, the Madonna of knots. What? I had never heard of the Madonna of knots, but there is. And she's been with us since the early 1700s, and there's a fabulous painting of her. And I got myself a cup of the Madonna with knots. And we pray to the Madonna to help us to untie the knots in our life so that we can become a whole human being. She says, Mary, undoer of knots, pray for us. And I tell of this in the book. For that to come around now, 30 years later, oh, here it is. This is so I researched the Madonna and bought this wonderful statue, but I did not recognize until the statue came that there she is with her foot on the snake.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. It's oh, and so that this is my piece then. So then I went back to my piece and gave her a red ribbon. Before, when I first did it, I did not have the red ribbons. I had the red ribbon, but not the knots. It was about like this, and I called it I Love My Red Ribbon because it's symbolic of the line of my life. And some of you will find that other people talk about the red ribbon as symbolic of the line of our lives, but I added the red ribbons to it, and one ribbon has the knots in it, which I have yet to untie, and the other ribbon is smooth because I'm willing to say I've untied some knots.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So what about the apple?
So the apple. Well, all of this snake and Madonna and took me back to Lilith in the garden. And so at the time of the election, that Hillary lost the election, I thought, well, we have a job to bring the feminine up, the consciousness of the feminine up. And shortly after that, we did elect quite a few women into the House. And so it looked like, and things were getting better. So we do get a seat at the table, but now what do we have to say? Now that we get a seat at the table, what do we have to say? And what does becoming conscious mean? And so I realized that Lilith is an archetype for me. And one of the things that will happen when you start to mine the jewels in your unconscious. We do this with collages in our studio, using magazines, images out of magazines. When I began to mine that, I realized that Lilith is an archetype for me. In my marriage, I refused to obey, and Lilith says to God, I am no longer going to obey Adam. This is not fair. And God says, well, that's the way it is, and you will obey Adam. This is in the Kabbalah. And Lilith says, no, we're made of the same thing. You made each of us out of earth. And therefore, I'm equal, and I should be able to make some of the decisions around here. And God says, no, this is the way it's going to be. So Lilith is banished from the garden, and off she goes to have a great time. Lots of men in her life, many, many children, great goings on. She becomes mature, as you see in Mary's painting. I asked Mary, what is the deal with this painting? Because I noticed it in her collection one day. This painting is a big painting. It's like 5 feet. Yeah, 6 feet, 6 feet tall. What's the deal with this painting? And she said, well, she's a mature woman. Sorry, she's a mature woman. And Eve is an adolescent. So what is actually happening here is that God finds out that Lilith is out here having a high old time, and he's furious, and he kills all of her children. So she's horrified and says, I must get even with God. I know what I'll do. I'll go back into the Garden of Eden, and I will take the apple from the tree, the forbidden fruit, and I'll take a bite of that apple and give it to Eve. But how will I get back into the garden? So she turns herself into a snake. And I need to put a great big thing here. And gets into the garden that way. And this painting by Michelangelo is on the Sistine ceiling. And here we have Lilith has turned herself into a snake, wrapped around the tree. And she's handing the apple, and Adam is trying to stop her. But she's handing the apple to Eve. And because Eve takes the apple and takes the bite of the apple, they are banished from the garden. And to this day, the feminine is seen as the evil force. But what actually happened is that Eve becomes conscious, and we become conscious of good and evil. I think we're not very conscious of evil yet, actually. We know it, but we're not very conscious of it because we don't see it coming. And then we're always surprised. Like Israel, they were surprised by January 6th. No, what was it? February 6th for the
October 7th.
I must not get caught up in that.
October 7th.
October
Yeah.
6th. Thank you. Thank
They
you.
didn't have their toe on the snake.
That's for sure. That's for sure. So that's an example of how staying true to my imagery. When I do that, when I stay with it and I keep going back to it for the material in my art, it takes me along my red ribbon. This one is one of the last pieces. I just finished it a couple days ago, actually. Wally's going to help me with this again. If you would put the camera and the light on it. Yeah, that's good. This is the snake coming back into the Garden of Eden. So I think that, can you see that? I want to show the the snake itself has turned into a dragon. I was
Yes, but you have to
wondering-
stop moving it.
Okay.
Because the camera keeps trying to focus,
Yeah,
so.
let's maybe turn these down, actually. They're actually easier without the lighting, because it's highlighting wrong. No,
Stop moving the camera.
okay, it's
And
right.
turn the light on. And then I think everything will be stable. Turn this light on. I can't reach the switch.
It's
There you go.
highlighting. Okay, now let me put,
The light is blaring it out. Okay, that's
Yeah.
good.
that's better.
Yeah.
So if you can see, I wonder, why am I spending so much time on the snake head? But it became more and more real. That this was this huge snake, of course, and that this is Eden. And then I realized these are the women coming into Eden. And at the top, these are the women. The snake is hanging on to the apple here, by the way. I realize that the snake's claws are coming around and hanging onto the apple. And the snake is embracing the women at the top. I'd like that, if we can move the cameras with it.
There we go.
So at the top, I think of these as the women taking their seats in the Garden of Eden. And this is the vocabulary that I'm working on right now. What does that look like? And I'm working on it. It's my long-range goal, is that we have our seats in the Garden of Eden, our seats at the table.
I don't see the women.
The women are the gold at the top. Each
Ah.
of those is a woman, those gold spikes coming up. There we go, yeah. And I've been doing those spikes for a long time, but I did not think of them as the women at the table until after I did this piece, or when I put those in. I was like, what is this is coming up in the sculpture? Where is it going? And when I
And
did that,
this is the dragon head. Here's the eyes and the snout
yeah. And it's
Oh, yeah.
hanging on to the apple under
holding
its,
onto the apple.
under its jaw. Now. So there's another piece in the kiln, much larger than this, that is an elaboration on this, and I'll stick with this for a while to see what does that look like when the women arrive. But I
You can
think,
see the teeth.
yeah. But I think that there's a transformation. Let's get myself back in here. Thank you. Thanks, boss. I think that for me, there's a transformation going on about the snake. And that it's embracing, I'd say it's the masculine, and it's embracing the feminine and protecting it and hanging on to that apple of consciousness. So the next sculpture is, what does that look like? Or maybe
Wow.
a collage about it. What does that look like? Yeah.
So, Coeleen, there is a question here, and maybe we ought to start moving to questions, because
Yes,
this
yes.
book is so rich and bounteous that we probably can't possibly get through it all. And after all, we'd like people to buy the book. I've bought 14 of them so far, and I want to give one to each of my grandchildren. But the question that comes up, which seems an important one with respect to the doodle, is if style comes up in doodle, is it possible to change one's style by intentionally changing one's doodle?
I believe so. Yes, I believe so. There was a time when I was very taken with Gustav Klint's work. I loved it. And that led me to doing elaborate gold luster pieces, but much more delicate design than I'm doing now. And then I got tired of that, and I started to study Hundewasser because there's more energy in his stroke. And then I looked up, started to study the character, the personality of Hundewasser. And it turns out that he studied Klimt. So there's this line, you know, that I would encourage you to find the artist whom you admire, or the writer, or the poet, the sculptor whom you admire. What is their vocabulary? What are they talking about? Mary Holmes used to say, if you don't know what you're talking about in the studio, then quit wasting your time. Get on to it. So what is their vocabulary? And then what is their style? What is it that you admire so much? And some of you know that I'll have you do that in the studio, to copy. This is very un-American, but it's not un-European. When Nick Jonk, a famous Dutch sculptor, came here to teach a master class, after 2 days, these were all professional artists in this master class. After 2 days, he said, I can see that none of you have studied the masters. And he gave us the great gift. Every day he would go down to Logos book and come back in the next morning with 4 or 5 books and say, here is the one for you. Here is the one for you. Here is the one for you to study. And so sometimes I'll tell my students, study Henry Moore. Your style looks a little like Henry Moore, or the Mayan. And then when you study Henry Moore, you find out that he studied the Mayans. See the connection between, you're on a line, or there is a line that you can get on and you can learn a lot from. We're so American, we don't think we should copy, but just try it.
It was a lovely little section in your book when you talked about the Chinese tradition and how unusual it is for them to even understand what we were talking about when you're saying, oh, you know, come up with your own thing. Don't just copy.
Yeah. Well, they will copy a master as part of their education until they can't tell the difference between the master and themselves. Then they are free to do their own thing. But that learning of technique, of that figuring out, how did they do it? How did they figure that out? I'm not sure I addressed it, what you were saying. The Chinese will put themselves, they are not plein air painters. You see all of these wonderful landscapes by the Chinese. They're so beautiful, but what they do is go into the landscape and maybe write some poetry, explore the landscape, get to know it. You don't sit there and look at it and draw it. No, you get into it and you get to know it. Then they go back to the studio and they wait to find themselves in the right space, which might be like reflection. And then they paint the memory of where they were. And I remember C.C. Wang, for whom a whole Chinese gallery has been named after C.C. Wang in the Metropolitan Museum. There's a beautiful little video out about him. And he's in the video, he's painting these landscapes. And he said, of course, you will never see my landscapes in real life. That's what he means, you know, is that they're coming from his imagination. So when I was on the streets in China, to be in the 90s, early 90s, when I would draw something, this was fascinating. I didn't know why at the time, but the Chinese would gather around me to watch this going on. They'd never seen it.
That's so amazing.
And then they'd get between me and what I was trying to draw. Because you didn't need to see it. Problem because they thought I'd already looked at it. And you only have to look once if you're Chinese, which is something that we ought to know, because they can walk through a computer lab and walk out and it's all there.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all there because they've developed that. They're unconscious, that way
Mhm.
of seeing. They've developed it. And we think we're making agreements with them about what? It's hard to say, really what it is. We have a long ways to go to understand that mind as they do, maybe not so long away. Are there other questions that I would like to answer questions, really?
Yeah, let me put the gallery up, and there's a functionality to raise your hand on the YouTube chat, and so, or on the I'm sorry, on the Zoom, there's a place you can raise your hand, and so I hope everyone will do that. The first one to get his hand up was Jordan Hoggard, so Jordan, go for it.
Yeah.
First off, thank you for this. I mean, robust, and thank you. And I appreciate the way you can walk through the raw pieces that keep them important as the not knowing. But what's interesting is when you went through the Lilith story today, in the Kabbalah, as well as enhanced by folklore, it's my favorite story of all time. And Paul Valeray wrote the poem about Stu and Serpent, which is Sketch of a Serpent. And it was 16 pages of 4 stanzas apiece, but it was a heady egoed serpent seducing Eve to bite the apple. But what I love now is that 2 things: the trickster image that was a male serpent. It's Lilith. And we see that core strength that I think is important in the feminine these days. And not a way to squelch the masculine in males, in a way for complement, true nature. But something I had never noticed until just now, your process is the Lilith story. When I look at, what am I going to do, my intent, and I gather, well, that's Lilith walking up to God and going, nope. And then I elaborate. But then illumination and reflection, I'm immersing in maturation. I'm out having all these Lilith kids, and I'm experiencing life. And then the share it, well, that's coming back as the tree, as the serpent, and getting Eve to birth consciousness. But what I find, getting all that to my question, it's felt also not just evil. Do you feel then keeping your foot on the serpent makes a conscious place, like a gas station, to keep your conscious fueled by the unconscious?
Yes. Yeah. We're having quite a bit of an awakening about it now. And to be able to recognize it, for what it is, and to not whitewash things.
Yes. And I think that piece, Jamie Anderson said, grief is love with no place to go. And one thing I've noticed with the doodling, I've always tried to be comfortable with the not knowing and not waste trouble. And that's fine as an abstract, and it gets me through. But what I'm finding now is I'm starting to mine more gold from the doodling process. Instead of just going through the passage, it's actually producing value. Instead of I just got through. And so I think I've started to find, and I want to thank you for this, less presenteeism in the process, where I somehow can naturally navigate. Now it's, well, no, what am I doing? I can't just savant my way through it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Karen had a question. Karen, go ahead.
Thank you, Jordan. Yeah.
And you'll need to unmute, Karen. Yes, go.
Yes, Coeleen, nice to see you, and thank you very much for this very good presentation. Creating art is a solitary experience, and I believe that we are formed through relationship. How do we, or can you address the matter of the individual endeavor as it fits in relationship and community?
Yes. That's true. I agree with you. And I do talk about that in my book, that you make the statement of intention when we tell our family or our significant other, I'm going to take a class. I'm going to take a class at the university or the community college. That's our statement of intention. We're letting them know that I'm going to do something that's going to take time at a specific time, and I'm not going to be available on Tuesday evenings from 7 o'clock to 10. And it's going to cost some money. So this is all statement of intention. Or my daughter Kathleen would take the table in the corner of the living room and announce to the family, this is my table. This is my art studio. Keep your stuff off of it, no dropping your books here. This is my space, and I need this space to work. So these are statements of intention, and they can be tough, but I think the family can take it. I remember Kathleen as a toddler being able to comprehend that from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, mommy's going to be working at her table. And I can either nap or be quiet. And she'll come back at a certain time, or I'll be home at 10 o'clock. But we make these statements of intention to others. And then protecting that space that we've taken, protecting that time, that we're not going to be interrupted, that this is important. Respecting yourself and respecting the muse. And then there is this need at the end to share with other people. At the end, that look what happened, look what I found out. Or how did your day go? I remember Paula Solari, if any of you have been to Arcasani, one day when I was there, I was lucky to hear him speak. And he talked about the need. He built the city on a crescent, on a hill, so that people could see each other off in the distance during the day, but that they could see each other. And at the end of the day, it's like, how did your day go? You want to know. You asked, how did your day go? Or I saw you over there. How's it going? There's this need for us to stay connected, because not only are we separating ourselves from people, but we're separating our consciousness, and you don't want to be interrupted.
Yeah. So Hannah Sward has a question. Hannah.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Hannah. Hi, good to see you.
So good to see you too. What an incredible morning. I know that you have spoken before about the importance of teaching and passing on. And I was wondering if, if you can speak to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that we owe it. When we have a gift, we owe it to share it. And the gift is the one that comes to you naturally. So I just think that owing it is so important to do, that it is a gift, and you have a gift for writing and poetry, and it is in your lineage. Your father, Robert Sword, was a wonderful poet, and it's there. You owe it to do that. That's what you're here for.
Thank you.
I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
I wonder if you want to go a little bit more into detail about the red ribbon.
Well, recognizing it, I think that when I started to write a memoir, I wondered, how am I going to connect all of these things? And how am I going to connect the events of my life so that they make any sense at all? And so I have Melody Culver, who is here, who is my editor and got the idea that I could tell the story with a red ribbon. And so put in these names. I think Maslow's right at the top here. Well, actually, Betty Friedan is right at the top. And that I realized that this is going through and that perhaps I could tell my story that way. And this was how we came up with it. And so each of these breaks is a significant thing that happened, but I did not know about knots yet. But of course, each one of these has turned out, it's a knot that I cut or untied. So it became symbolic for me to connect the events in my life that way.
Penelope Ryder's here from London.
Hello, Penelope.
Hi, Coeleen. So lovely to see you. It's been a gift for me to see your studio as well. I wanted to ask you, with Lilith, when did she first come to your consciousness? I'm just wondering if that makes sense, asking that. When did you first recognize her in your life?
Let's see. It happened after the election when Hillary lost. And I had that feeling of wanting to bring the feminine forth. And so I started doing images that I thought were Eve offering the apple to Mr. President. And I played with that for a while. I think one of my favorite pieces is so many apples, so few takers. This is, so I'm not aware of Lilith really yet. I'm feeling discouraged that my apples are nothing is happening. I'm offering them, but nothing is happening. So then I do dismay. So many apples, so few takers. And then I refuse to give my apples anymore. This is probably Lilith leaving the garden. And then I began to have a confusion in my mind about the two characters, Eve and Lilith, and that backed me up to Lilith. I realized she's the arch feminist for us. But isn't it interesting that we don't know about her? We don't know about her, but she's on the Sistine ceiling, for God's sake.
Yep.
You know, Michelangelo knew about her. Yeah. And see, we're all living an archetype, whether we know it or not.
Right.
Each of us has a separate archetype, our own. And that changes, of course, depending on what it is that you're working on. And so to find that archetype, because the archetype is running your show, and you might want to change that. You might want to become aware of it. And so now Lilith has come into the garden. She has the red ribbon, has become the snake, has become Lilith, has become the embracing of the table in the garden. So that's right where I am now, is following that symbol, that symbolism.
So we need to wrap this up because it's nearly 2 hours, and I thank you very much, Coeleen, for doing this. But there's a couple of other points. One is Cherie on YouTube says, "Incredible love is here." And I can certainly vouch for that.
Yep.
And
I can too.
And Marianne Robbins says, "I would like to hear more about the book." I think we've been talking about it for 2 hours, but Coeleen, if you want to, it's just an incredibly beautiful book and so sumptuous and bounteous. You see it and it looks like it's a small book, but my heavens, it is not when you open it up and start looking at it. It is just an incredible piece of literature.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to be able to have so much, so many visuals in it.
Yes.
My memories of China march across the
Yeah.
bottom of the page, and the tea bowls from Japan. And I'm so glad that I could, oh my God, what Melody went through to make all of this happen visually. And then Wallace, my son, he designed the cover. And
Mhm.
all of these apples that have been bit are pretty wonderful.
That's great.
I like the feel of it. I was surprised that it was going to be so small. And I expected Wallace to say, when he saw it, and he just said, perfect, it's cuddly.
Yeah.
To bed with you. And
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's well worth the price. Tim, did you want to wrap up a little bit here since you're the
Well, I just-
moderator?
Here, Jordan is showing us one of his.
Oh,
Let me spotlight this.
oh, yes.
I have to say, I just noticed the single tied off knot, and it feels like a placenta tied off or left to lotus birth. We take the rest of the stem cells. I had never noticed that knot until you're going through the knots today. And I love that makes quite a visceral feeling of connection, this apple to its tree. And powerful memory with just the one single knot. With this, you sent me, I was an apple taker, and it's right in the center of my altar, so I had to go over and get it, but I had never noticed the single knot until just now.
I didn't either until just now. And that's the magic. That's the magic. That's wonderful.
Synchronicity.
Yes,
That's
Yep.
right.
that's quite an example of it.
And Coeleen has given many of us apples.
Uh-huh.
I was
Yeah.
just seeing, I think Leah held up hers.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yep.
Diane, did you have something that you wanted to ask?
I just wanted to, I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand, but on the screen, I just wanted to thank you. You've been such an inspiration to me, Coeleen. And I, for one, have benefited from your illumination of how important ego strength is to an artist of any kind. So I'm indebted to you for that eternally. Thank you.
Yeah, that I know you're a writer, and that comes from writing just what you want to write about, the way you want to write about it. Yeah.
Yeah, this whole interview has been really illuminating and warm, and I just am so appreciative of you taking your time to spend it with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's what it's
Yeah.
all about.
And thanks to Skip for making this channel available and for taking
Yeah.
care of all the archiving and everything. He's got what, 1,200 videos by now?
1,400 and
1,400?
right, and there's this video will be available online immediately after we hang up. I mean, within 5 minutes it'll be available to see in its entirety on YouTube.
We're online.
I'll put it back on the chat. We put it
Okay.
in there once before, but
Oh, I'm
here it
sorry.
is.
Yep,
Thank you all.
that's the homepage of the channel that Tim just put up. So
There's
thank
lots
you
of good information on there, a lot of other interviews, and Coeleen is just sort of the apple on top of the cake here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, indeed.
Thank
I mean,
you.
it's just an honor to be able to be the first interview for your book. I really
Very nice.
appreciate it. And I really love the book. I love the book, absolutely. And
I think Coeleen is the apple of our eye.
Yes.
yeah, absolutely.
Said,
No doubt about it. So I'm not going to shut this down instantaneously. If people want to keep chatting, please do. I'm not going to just shut us out, but I
Thank
think we could say to Coeleen, thank you so much, and if you wish to stay around, fine, but it's not me that's forcing you to use your energy.
Well, if there's a question that didn't get answered, I really care about the process. And each time you comment, look what happened when Jordan, pointed that out about the knot in the apple
Yeah,
stem.
yeah. So Gilda
If
is
you have a
here.
question, please ask it, and I'll do the best I can for the next few minutes.
Yeah, so Gilda is here asking a question. So Gilda, you're next.
Well, thank you so much, Coeleen. It's been lovely. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. We watched the progression that is so alive and palpable at the point where she comes and decides she's not going to give any more apples. And we're wondering if that apple was destroyed by her, no more apples, end of apples, something else must happen. Have you, at that point in that sequence, can you perhaps offer your view?
What an intriguing question.
Meaning, let's say I decide to take my artwork and put it in the bonfire, and I feel so relieved.
And you feel so what?
Relieved.
Relieved.
Yes, just free. Yes.
Yes. I like your question. What happens to the apples? I wrote a poem about what was happening to the apples that I was offering up, that I thought we as women were offering up, and thinking that they were just lying on the ground, rotting, slimy mess, not being taken seriously and not being digested. So what are the when Lilith decides to keep one for herself, what might that look like? That's something you're tickling the ivories. What does happen? I like the question so much. It has something to do with the Lilith, the snake, embracing the women, holding on to that apple. It has something to do with that, the claws that are holding the apple still there. It's just something for me to take further. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gilda.
Could I say something at this point?
Yeah, go ahead.
John Gardner wrote a novel called October Light. And in it talks about the apples in the cellar in the fall, how they become taut and wrinkled. And it just makes me think full of wisdom. That thought came to my mind when you asked that question too, Gilda. Thank you for the question. So those apples now should be very wise. They've been so long in the cellar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I just have Coeleen to thank for bringing me back to art, because I never did it until I was 45. And when I started doing it when I was 45, I was a little bit afraid of some of the things that came up. I was drawing portraits and I was getting the shadow of everybody I was painting. And that wasn't very popular. And so I put my paints away for a long, long time. But Coeleen has shown me the way to come through. And I really, really appreciate that. And
So Joanna has her hand up.
okay, Joanna, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi.
Dawn.
I thank you so much for this. It's incredible. I have a question. Could the apple be equated with experience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The times that you bit the apple and the times that you did not bite the apple and you wish you had.
So if you didn't bite the apple, you didn't have experience, the experience of whatever.
Well,
Yeah,
life
regrets,
itself
you
is,
know, regrets to not have said something that you wish you had said.
Alert from low battery.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. It's it'll haunt you. You know, it'll haunt you. And I think that it's because at that point, a basic truth within yourself is realized. A basic truth with which you can't live with any longer. That was what Lilith did. There was a basic truth going on. And she explains it, it's not fair. It's a basic truth. And because it's a truth, she acted on it. Now, she might have chosen to not go with this whole thing, with her word. That would be another story, but she did. And so I can look back on my life and see times that I bit the apple and took the consequences, and the times that I didn't, you know. Looks like an urgent hand up here. Yes? Yeah. What's your question that with the hand up? Who's? Oh, you're on mute.
let's see if I can change the view here so I can see.
Oh, she wants to ask her question. So much.
Okay,
Oh,
can you
good.
hear me?
There you go. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
I had already gone to YouTube. Coeleen, throughout this whole thing, I just can't help but wonder what it has cost you to be such a giver and a teacher and all of those things, and physically, emotionally, mentally, aesthetically, in your own practice, in your own life. What has all of this cost you?
Well, it's cost a lot. I had to leave Eden. And that was a big price to pay. I had to give up my art the way I was doing it. So there were things that prices that I've paid for it, but it's like skiing down a hill, you know. Once you start on something that is so real, it's so real. It's just, you know, it isn't anything that I invented at all. It's just an observation that seemed to need to be pointed out. And it has so much life in it. It's just filled with life when I keep going to the creative process, seeing this unfolding, recognizing it, and enabling it as much as I can, each of the stages. So it certainly has changed my life. It has formed my life. You don't get this without a price, but it was worth it.
Yeah, there's a comment on YouTube where Cherie says, when one bites the apple at the wrong time, there are worms swimming.
Oh boy. If you let it sit around too long waiting, that's what happens.
Yeah. Okay, Jordan, one more question. Shortly, briefly.
Not a question, actually, an observation. I mean, the Latin node, I mean, lymphoid tissues make a node, a lymph node, that instead of being a knot that I have to untie, I just came to me, look at this little confluence. I think I'll go there and see what it lives in there, because it's connecting to origin. So it felt like flipping the meaning of the not to the Latin node, and I got the word confluence immediately, that it gives me a lot of ways to come at. Now, not all this, I'm going to go in there. What's up
Mhm.
there? So
Yeah.
thank you.
And that's where the seeds are.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Coeleen, after an hour, we had 97 people still following this video. So obviously everybody was totally entranced with what you were saying.
Mhm.
And they will be more entranced even by the book. Could you hold up the book at once again?
Yes.
Thank you. Heart and
you
Spirit, a
can-
memoir.
You can
And
email me and or you can go to Book Baby.
I would
okay,
encourage people to get it from Coleen's studio so that she gets more of the profit than the big companies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's nice.
You can
That's
go to
nice.
her website, CoeleenKiebert.art.
Thank you.
And
Thank you all.
CoeleenKiebert.art.
Marlene is asking to repeat which classes you have coming up.
I don't have anything scheduled right now. I'm still involved in teaching the masterclass, a certificate program for people who are interested in teaching art and spirit, wanting to do art and spirit workshops, or actually much of the intention of the book is to be a guide for that, and also to be a companion to the individual artist working alone in their studio. And so after the certificate program ends, which is the middle of March, I'll probably start something up in April. Maybe there's more to talk about, more to get into, and maybe some condensed versions of that. I'd appreciate you just paying attention to the emails that we send out. We'll keep you posted. Certainly this group of 100 people, you'll hear about it.
Yep,
Thank you so
absolutely.
much for your reception and your attention. And yeah, it's all magic. It's really wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, at this point, I am going to call a halt because I know it's hard for you to leave, Coeleen, and I have to make it so that you can leave, so that you can get some rest. But thank you so much for being here today. It's been so valuable to all of us.
Yeah, thank you
I
again.
really appreciate it.
Thank you, Coeleen.
And now the next one we want is Tim's book, which will
what's
be
that gonna
quite
be, Skip?
different. Well, I mean, all your wisdom that you publish every day on Patreon, but you know, Tim has a different approach, which is also quite special and unique. So I'm just needling him a little bit.
Well, thanks, Skip. I'll
Well,
keep you
that-
posted. All right, take
Bye,
care.
Coeleen. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take